Hello and welcome to Talking Meds, a podcast from PrescQIPP, engaging conversations about medicines-related dilemmas. I'm your host, Jonathan Underhill, Medicine's Clinical Advisor here at PrescQIPP. Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Talking Meds. I'm delighted to be joined today by Katie Smith. Katie, like me, is a pharmacist. She's now the Director of Clinical Quality here at PrescQIPP and has worked with PrescQIPP since their inception in 2010 and joined the team properly in around about April 2018. Katie is responsible for the quality assurance of all of the PrescQIPP resources before they go out for publication. But in particular, she leads on the deprescribing resource impact, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. Katie's worked for about 29 years as a pharmacist in many of the different parts of pharmacy, as a community pharmacist, as a GP practice pharmacist, and as a medicines information pharmacist, which is my background as a long time ago as a medicines information pharmacist. She says her real love was being a medicines information pharmacist because she enjoys helping people to know what medicines are for and checking that they're used correctly. Like many of the MI pharmacists I've worked with, she has an eye for detail and likes things to be accurate. I'll just leave it there. Anyone who knows a medicines information pharmacist will be able to relate to that, I think. Outside of work, Katie enjoys reading, cooking and watching sport, particularly the trials and tribulations of Ipswich Town Football Club. I can again relate to that because we share an icon of football, a legend of football, Sir Bobby Robson. There is a statue of Sir Bobby Robson at Portman Road. I've seen it, and there's a statue of him at my beloved St James's Park as well. There's a lot of real affection between the fan base of Ipswich and Newcastle United. And yes, it's been a little bit of an up and down few years for Ipswich, hasn't it, Katie?
It has.
Katie, welcome. Lovely to see you.
Thank you.
Was there anything I missed from that?
Oh, I don't think so. When I look back, I've actually done quite a lot. So I started in community pharmacy with Boots the Chemist and was with them for a couple of years and then decided I needed to move to hospital pharmacy. But I didn't move into like the main pharmacy department. I went to medicines information at Ipswich Hospital and in reality to the regional MI team, which was the East Anglia Medicines Information Service. And I really found my niche because I ended up staying there for 20 years before I came across to PrescQIPP. But through my medicines information work, I did lots and lots of different things. I did a lot of researching and teaching of medicines information skills. I worked in a GP clinical practice for a while and, spoke to patients. And that was around the time of the National Service Framework for older people. So that was my real introduction into, talking to people about their medicines. And you had longer to talk to them than when you were in community pharmacy. And I've done, worked for Boots substantively, but then I've done locums for Lloyd's and Tesco's as well when they had pharmacies. So yeah, I've done it from lots of different angles and enjoyed every part. But yeah, medicines information is my real passion, and that really does dovetail nicely with impact.
Yes, I think so. It's an interesting one. I think when community pharmacists go and work in GP practices or indeed go to work in hospital pharmacy, sometimes their clinical skills and their communication skills are a lot better than they are for if you've got a hospital pharmacy background, where perhaps you haven't been as used to seeing patients on a daily basis in the volume that you do in community pharmacy. So I think there's a real strength in having that sort of squiggly career where you've worked in lots of different sectors. So how come you ended up at PrescQIPP then? What brought you there?
Well, when I was in medicines information, regional medicines information, you work in lots of different networks. So and one of the networks was the regional network. And in 2010, I was approached by Carol Roberts, who was the pharmacy lead at the SHA. And they came to me and said they wanted me to produce some information about how to stop medicines waste being generated from prescriptions. And was there something we could write or put together that would help prescribers to think about how they could stop medicines to stop waste being generated? And that was all part of the QIPP prescribing work stream. So quality, innovation, productivity, prevention, which is all, the whole ethos of of PrescQIPP itself. And we developed, or I wrote a document which we called Rational Discontinuation of Medicines. And it was just 4 sides of A4. And the real focus was on things that were easy to stop. So statins, antihypertensives, PPIs, things we're still talking about today, by the way. And, you could stop them easily and safely, and it would then stop the patients and the GPs generating waste. And literally everything has snowballed from there. So after rational discontinuation of medicines, it did catch on locally, and it was thought to be a good idea. And we developed it. So in 2011, we renamed it Optimizing Safe and Appropriate Medicines Use, or the catchy title of OSAMU, which didn't go down well. And Carol we thought this was good. So they took it to London to another group of pharmacists. And really, they got some negative feedback, and it was thought to be not a great idea. We don't talk to people about stopping medicines. We don't want to, be discontinuing inappropriate medicines. And really, we don't want to continue this work. But Carol decided that wasn't on, and we did continue the work. Unfortunately, there's been a sea change in opinion, and now everybody's talking about deprescribing and stopping medicines. So in a way, we always think that we were the forefront of this, because we started this so long ago, and it's now what everybody does. It was what everybody talks about. And then because on the back of OSAMU, we expanded it so it covered a few more medicines. And then in 2016, we decided we were going to cover the whole of the BNF, and it just exploded into what became IMPACT, because we felt we needed a document with an acronym that actually meant something and people would remember. And IMPACT has sort of snowballed from there, really. So we do now cover the entire BNF. And its IMPACT has sort of changed itself a bit over the past few years. So we introduced the clinical risk and deprescribing priority, and they were thought to be useful. We were approached by Naomi Fleming a couple of years ago to expand the antimicrobial section. So we worked with her to do that. We've also recently, well, you were part of it, in 2024, 2025, undertook the Delphi study to really quality assure the clinical risks and deprescribing priorities. And that was a really interesting exercise, working with lots of consultant pharmacists and prescribers and pharmacologists, all sorts, to really make sure that the clinical risks and deprescribing priorities are accurate for the people that use our tool. And yeah, it's just all about keeping it up to date, because as you know, and you talk about this all the time to various groups, there's evidence and information coming out all the time, and it's how do you stay on top of it? How do you make sure that you're using the information that's really current for practice? So my main job is really keeping on top of what's happening at the moment and making sure that IMPACT reflects that.
Okay, yeah, so there's lots in that, isn't there? I think you're right. Initially, and I remember when I was at the National Prescribing Centre having conversations with people about safely stopping inappropriate medicines and doing that person-centered medication review. And the notion of deprescribing or stopping medicines was really scary to lots of people.
Yes.
Because they saw it as a way of cutting costs, and only cutting costs. And we were at pains to explain that that's not what this is about. Yes, there may well be some financial savings that's available there, but this is about the appropriate use of medicines in people. And this is that. And my journey took me down the route of understanding how people make decisions, either as clinicians or as patients, and into shared decision making, which I know is an important part of IMPACT as well. So just to be clear, then IMPACT now stands for, and I really like this title actually, Improving Medicines and Polypharmacy Appropriateness Clinical Tool. So when we had Lisa McCarthy from Canada on here, one of the things that they've done in the Canadian Deprescribing Network is insert the word appropriateness in there, which I really like. It's interesting, when I worked at NICE, they didn't like the word appropriate because they felt it was subjective. I really like it because I think it's person-centered. And what's appropriate for one person might not be appropriate for another, and vice versa. So I actually quite like having that word in these tools. Let's go back right to basics then. So you've explained what IMPACT is. How is it put together?
So I suppose if we go right back to the start, it was done on a literature review. looking for information. So it's evidence-based, it's backed up by references, and that has just continued all the way through since 2010. Everything in Impact has got evidence behind it. There are no off-the-cuff statements. Everything's backed up by evidence and reference. And all the information is coming from really key resources. So things like NICE, the clinical knowledge summaries, the BNF, our own PrescQIPP resources. Like they should be, I should have said those first, really. But I mean, PrescQIPP is all about safe and appropriate medicines use over many conditions. And we write many bulletins which are referenced within Impact, because they're key to the reasons why people need to think about is the use of that medicine in that condition appropriate for that person. Drug safety updates, the Maudsley deprescribing guidelines, the Canadian Deprescribing Network has loads of good stuff as well. And Primary Health in Tasmania produce amazing deprescribing algorithms, which we also reference in Impact. There's just so many examples of where we look for information. And I suppose Impact is useful because we go to all those places and we pull all that information together and we put it in one place. So we do also reference Stop Start and Beers criteria and Scotland polypharmacy work, which have all done very similar things. But the Beers criteria is American based, and they do treat their medicines are used in different ways to us. They have different licenses, they treat conditions differently. And Stop Start has a more European feel to it. So again, we don't always align with Europe. We do sometimes, but not always. So this is very much based on UK practice, UK medicines, and what's in our BNF, what we are using every day for our patients. And I think that's why it's so key.
Absolutely. So for those people, if there is some people out there who haven't seen Impact, we'll put a link to it in the show notes so you can access it. Essentially, it's a sort of a PDF document, okay, an interactive PDF document. As Katie says, all of the chapters in the BNF are in the index at the front. So gastrointestinal, cardiovascular, respiratory, etc., etc., etc. And you click on the link from there, and that takes you into, if you like, the monograph of the different medicines that you have there. And within that, what you have is the considerations that you might want to think about if you see a person who's on, for example, an antispasmodic. And it tells you the sorts of things you need to be thinking about in your conversation with the person about the appropriate use of their antispasmodic. And helpfully, as Katie says, it links to other tools and resources that can help facilitate those conversations, such as Stop Start or the Scottish Polypharmacy Guideline, or some examples where we link to GP evidence, Julian Treadwell's website on GP evidence, where you can explain the risks and benefits of the different options to people. So for me, I think this is really helpful because it helps people prepare for a medication review. If you've got a person who perhaps has 4 or 5 comorbidities, the options for you as a clinician are going to the NICE guideline or CKS or something and reading all of those guidelines for all of the different conditions that the person might have. That's actually quite difficult to do. So this is, if you like, a labour-saving device that takes you quickly to what's important and pertinent and material to that conversation with the person. It doesn't tell you what to do. Importantly, it doesn't tell you stop this, start that, whatever. It's to facilitate that conversation after you've found out what matters most to the person. But here's the shortcut to at least give you a little bit of a help to get up to speed quickly about the sorts of conversations you want to be looking at. So yeah, it's really helpful for that. So you talked about updating it, and obviously we as you say, we went through a bit of a Delphi process earlier this year to try and see if there was anything that we'd missed, and if there was any of the categorizations that we needed to change. But in terms of updating, then, how do you go about updating it, Katie? Because I guess it could be a really, really large amount of work to keep this up to date.
I'm not denying that it is. We literally produce one version and I start thinking about the next. But like any good MI pharmacist, when I see those news emails that we're all subscribed to, when things come in, I take a note of it and I put it in a Word document or one of my Excel spreadsheets. So when I want to do my updates, I can go back and I can look at particular, research or guidelines or things like that. So yeah, it is a big topic, keeping it up to date. But there's a team of people here at PrescQIPP as well who send me stuff and keep me updated with other things. And we have a pretty rigorous quality assurance process. So it will get reviewed by a number of other clinical pharmacists in the team. It goes out to stakeholders, and very often they say, oh, did you know that that's updated? Or did you know about this new piece of work? So almost by iteration, it becomes current and updated and really useful, because we do get it reviewed by people who are in practice at the moment as well using it. And just to go back a stage, so we were talking about how impact is presented. Yes, it is a PDF that you can go into and look at different things, but there's also the data visualization. So you can go in and you can select the medicines that your patient is taking, and you can produce for each patient that you're reviewing your own bespoke report. And when you get your bespoke report, the visualization gives you the ability to grade those patients' medicines on the clinical priorities, the clinical risk, or the deprescribing priority. So you can work out in your mind which are the ones you think you need to start talking to the patient about reducing or stopping, or if they're having problems with them. Patients can always, as we know, Jonathan, swing you a curveball, and what you think is a priority is not their priority, and they might want to stop something else. But I've done a lot of work on this with Lely Obo and done a lot of presentations with her, and she's always, you go with the patient, you go with what's important to the patient. Absolutely. Because then if you get their buy-in from the start and you stop something that they want to stop, then it enables you, with your journey with that patient, you can then introduce conversation about stopping other medicines that you are concerned about, where there is a risk of dependence or there's a risk of, severe side effects. So yeah, there are two ways to use impact for sure.
Yeah. No. Thanks for clarifying that. I think the other thing, and again, we'll put the link in the show notes to this. For people who haven't seen it before, or maybe have seen it and haven't realised that actually you can use the visual data pack to actually select patients. There's a link to a webinar, a training webinar on the website as well, isn't there? So again, you can watch that, and that will very quickly orientate you to be able to use this in the most effective way. Just on that then, and we've talked about how we think people might use this, and you use it to prepare for a sort of a structured medication review with a person. What about the future plans for impact? And in particular, I can see a world, maybe not too far in the future, where there is some sort of artificial intelligence tool that's used alongside impact, where, I don't know, you put in the conditions and it almost by magic goes to the bits of the impact tool that presents that information to you. Is that something that you think is possible? Or
I think we have to go that way, because I think that's the way the world is going, and we would be sort of seen as backwards, if you like, if we didn't look into that and pursue that idea.
You see lots of tools, don't you, out there, and you think, oh, that's really, really quite clever, but I've no idea how it works. I understand the provenance of the information being really important, and actually you guys have done all the hard work in getting the information correct within impact, and the tools that it links to being the trusted sources of evidence and information that you want. But that front end, I think, just maybe could be a little bit more user friendly, I think, would be what I'd say, because it does require you, as I say, to invest a bit of time in getting used to how to use this. And watching the webinar, when I watched the webinar, I was like, right, I understand it now. Whereas when I just looked at the PDF document, it was like, oh, it's a PDF document, but it's much more than that. And I think that's an important point. Yeah. So just in terms of immediate future plans then for impact, then is it obviously it needs to be kept up to date?
Yeah.
Are you planning any more sort of Delphi processes to sort of how often will you repeat that?
I'm not sure. That was the first time we'd actually ever done it externally, because originally when we did the clinical risks and deprescribing priorities, we did them internally, because essentially we're as some very experienced pharmacists within PrescQIPP, so we kept it in-house, but we decided we need to take some advice and just double check our own clinical knowledge, if you like. I mean, in the short to medium term, the other thing is to keep advertising it, keep telling people about it, telling people that it's there. And we set up as a primary care focused organisation. We are now a healthcare focused organisation. So we're NHS, we're across the NHS, across all sectors. So I think primary care, we need to keep our advertising there, but we also need to do a lot with hospital pharmacy and community pharmacy. Impact would have a lot of use, I believe, in hospital pharmacy, particularly people who are like, actively reviewing patients' medicines on wards and things like that, particularly community pharmacists, as they take up more clinical roles as well, doing medication reviews. There's a use for it there as well. So, I mean, advertising, like everything in life, if you don't tell people about it constantly, they forget about it because there's always so much stuff coming through. I think as well, we did start to put in Julian Treadwell's work from GP Evidence, but making sure that we keep up to speed with that, with what he's doing, because again, it's so useful, and making sure, we're advertising that to people, because again, I don't know how well that is known to all, all pharmacists or healthcare professionals.
No, I completely agree with you. I think there's, you can talk about the 4 years of implementation, but it starts with being aware of something. You can't adhere to something if you can't adopt something, you can't agree with something unless you're aware of it. So there is definitely something about awareness and that, and I know there's lots of word of mouth around impact as well. I've used this tool. Have you heard of this? And it gets used, quite quickly actually along those lines. And I also think you're right about, yes, this might have initially been seen as being a primary care focused resource, but there's lots and lots in here that's really, really applicable to people in secondary care. If you're on a medical admissions ward or whatever, and you do medicines reconciliation, or you're doing a medication review, this can be really, really helpful. And likewise within community pharmacy as well. As you say, those roles are increasing, having a more clinical focus. This is something that can get you up to speed quickly around the different considerations, but also in particular, if you've got a particular patient who's on, 15, 20 medicines, very quickly this gives you an orientation. So just to finish off, Katie, what do you think? And we always like to finish off with the kind of the what 3 things would you say to people? So what 3 things would you like clinicians to do differently about impact?
Use it and give me feedback, because that's the only way I'm going to improve it, because I no longer work in practice. I no longer see patients. So, and I do get that. We do get emails come through on our inquiry system, did you know this, or could we do that? We have to bear in mind, though, it is a general resource. It can't be patient specific. And some of the things I'm spoken about is that people have, looked at something and they've got a patient with a very specific issue that an impact doesn't cover it. And I can never cover those issues. It has to be general. It has to cover as many, the general population as much as possible. So that is one thing. I think you've said it as well as promoting it to colleagues. Word of mouth is sometimes the best way of advertising. We do Clinical Pharmacy Congress in London, up in Manchester, and we often talk about impact either directly as a presentation, or we make sure we put it into the presentations that we're giving, again, just to advertise that we've got it and it's part of our whole package of resources, that it's available there.
Okay, Katie, the third thing for me would be, and again, it's a little bit of feedback, but people who have done medication reviews previously, once you've tried it with the impact tool, and that's allowed you to prepare maybe in a more structured way, does that make your conversations with people a bit more person-centered? And just have a reflection on that and see whether you think impact has allowed you to do that, and think about the things that matter most to people. Not just, as you said, looking at the clinical risk and the deprescribing priority and putting a number on it and making a decision based on that. It needs to be person-centered. It needs to be person-specific, and that word appropriate comes in again. So I think that'll be the really, really useful thing for me. If people can use this to become more person-centered and then maybe give us some feedback on that as to whether you think that's happened or not. So I think there's three really useful things there for the future. So thank you so much for that, Katie. I think Impact's a great tool. Again, we'll put links in the show notes to that. I'm fascinated by what the future holds for Impact. I think there's a real potential for it to be a go-to resource for people. Maybe we need to think about increasing the awareness of that and marketing it, and maybe something around improving the front end of the tool as well. How easy that is, I don't know, but it would be great to explore that. I think
that's beyond our skill set, Jonathan.
I think it might be, but there are clearly clever people out there who can perhaps help.
There are.
Okay,
yes.
Thanks very much, Katie. See you soon.
Thank you very much. Take care. Bye.
Hello and welcome to Talking Meds, a podcast from PrescQIPP, engaging conversations about medicines-related dilemmas. I'm your host, Jonathan Underhill, Medicine's clinical advisor here at PrescQIPP.